Click a few buttons. We are live. A big hello to everyone watching. It's Maude for Maude's Book Club, and we've got an amazing Q&A happening. We've just been having a little powwow for a few minutes off camera, and I'm so excited to talk to you about an author that I first stumbled upon 5 or so years ago. And I think after the first book that I read, House in the Cerulean Sea, I stamped it with an Insta-buy stamp, going, anything that you write, TJ, I will absolutely buy it and read it. And with Maude's Book Club, this whole thing is just a guise for me to force you to read books that I want to read and then discuss about it. So without further ado, I would love to bring on board the author of the 2 books that we've covered over the years for Maude's Book Club, House in the Cerulean Sea and Under the Whispering Door, the book we just covered last month. So TJ, Klune, thank you so much for joining me today for Maude's Book Club. I really want to kick things off by getting our nerd on. You and I'm just going to move the book out of the way. You and I, big nerds. Can we just show the tattoos right now?
Oh, yeah.
May the Triforce be with you. This is amazing. Now, you've got a little shading on one of the shards, did I see? Is that intentional?
Exactly. At the bottom. Yeah, it's absolutely intentional. Because one of my very first memories is me and my father playing The Legend of Zelda, the very first Legend of Zelda when it came out in the 80s. And unfortunately, he passed away when I was a child. And so I got this in honor of him. The 2 top ones are shaded completely. The bottom one is to let me know there's a little piece missing because he's not here anymore. So that's why I got that tattooed on there, because of my love for video games, but also to honor my father in a way.
I mean, I just want to, there's so many similarities already. I have on my other wrist PB. What does that stand for, Maude? Papa Bear. My dad's the guy that got me into this culture of nerddom and just shaped who I was as a person. So I guess these 2 combined.
Yeah, well, I got this too right here. That is after my partner passed away, which was the inspiration for the book Under the Whispering Door. I got these words tattooed. It's "Let's Go," and the E and the T are in red. That stands for Eric and TJ, and the heart is in red. These words were 3 of the words he spoke when having to make a life. He had to make a life-changing decision. And he said these 2 words 6 times. And so I got them tattooed right here. And my little brother got those same words in the same style tattooed on his chest because he loved Eric. He loved Eric.
Go. I love that. Oh, and thank you for sharing that. And I think that, tattoos are an expression of permanence, the things that can shape us a lot of the time. So even just bonding over that. And honestly,
absolutely. I love hearing stories about why people get what they get. Sometimes it's just because they liked how it looked, and other times it has significance. And it's a interesting way to tell stories when you do it on your skin.
Because they are a permanent reminder of, and at that particular moment as well. And even if you grow and change, that is always going to be the thing that has been a prominent part of life. Love that. I do want to talk about sort of you as a writer and how you got into it all, because I find it incredibly fascinating. There's no one way to write a book, right? Now, I noticed a big difference that I've seen with your interviews and what I've learned about you and other authors is that you talk about writing with ADHD. I would love to learn more about that, because I would have thought that would be more pantsing than anything else. And it is a little bit, but you will draft an outline and nothing set in stone. So let's talk about your
Right. Yeah. So when I was a kid, unfortunately, I grew up in a household where I was not appreciated. So when I was a kid, being queer, I grew up in the 80s and 90s in rural Oregon, and in a very, very low class family. We were very poor. And so, of course, when you have a loudmouth kid who's effeminate, who can't stop talking and moving and everything, it creates issues. And unfortunately, I was not able to, nobody took me to the doctors to get tested for anything. It was just one of those country folk things. He'll grow out of it, whatever. But when you're a kid with ADHD, you become a teenager with ADHD who becomes an adult with ADHD. It's not something that goes away. It can become more manageable, absolutely, but it's not something that ever goes away. And here's the thing, I don't need it to. I'm not broken. I don't need to be fixed in any way, shape, or form. So when I grew up and actually got diagnosed, I went on medication that just really it really dimmed my inner fire. It felt like
Oh.
I felt like a zombie almost. And that's the point of that kind of medication in a way, but it affected me so much that I wasn't thinking creatively. Like I always think in images and colors and shapes and all this wonderful things that are in my brain, but that felt like it was muted and it was hazy and I couldn't get through to it. So I stopped doing that and it was rough for a little bit, I'll be honest. I was in my 20s then. But I've harnessed it for me. I've harnessed it for me. And when you talk about plotting versus flying by the seat of your pants, if I fly by the seat of my pants, the book will be, a million pages long and have tangents that make no sense and go off in a billion different directions. So instead, I plot meticulously, but not to the point where anything is set in stone. And I let my imagination work in that regard. And I've had to train myself to do that, but I've been published now for almost 15 years. And the fact that I've gotten this far and able to do what I've done, I think that, it's a cliche, but my ADHD is my superpower. It's what it is.
I was about to say exactly that because I think that a part of ADHD, hyperfocus, is one of the most
That
incredible
is me
superpowers.
to a T. That is me to a T. If I find something interesting, you need to clear out the rest of my schedule because I will be reading everything I can about it. The best thing in the world are footnotes on Wikipedia, where it leads you to all the sources that they pulled from, and then you find other things in those sources, and it just, oh no, 6 hours have gone by. What did I do?
6 days, but ask me anything about the topic and I can tell you and cite my
Yeah.
sources.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. But I couldn't tell you what I had for dinner last week. That's just how my brain works.
It's not important information. We keep what we need.
Yeah,
In
exactly.
say a couple of things, because it's been a wonderful thing to learn about you. Um, you had something that I don't think many children get, and that is the gift of someone believing in you. And in your case, it was
Oh yeah.
in the seventh grade. You had teachers that
Hmm.
read some of your work and saw your potential and told you that this, like, basically said, one day we are going to see a book with your name on
Hmm.
it. And I think that talking about superpowers, having the belief of someone that you are not only just capable but brilliant, what was that like for your childhood
Well,
when it was there's struggles in other ways?
that was remarkable because that was the first time in my life somebody had told me I'd done something good.
Mm.
And when you're a kid, and I mean, obviously, when you're growing up, you're trying to survive, you're trying to fit in, you have all of these things inside you that make you feel othered in ways that you can't relate to your peers. And I remember, I mean, I remember that day. We're talking about memory and the important things. I remember that day so vividly because we had to turn in a creative story that we wrote. We had to take a memory that we had and turn it into fiction. And I cannot remember for the life of me what it was that I wrote about. I cannot remember that. But what I can remember is that I had a mouthful of braces. I had huge glasses on that at the time, that's when transition lenses were becoming in vogue, but they hadn't quite worked out the science behind it. So wherever I went, my glasses were always dark. So
Oh no.
I looked like I was wearing sunglasses, and I was a nerdy, awkward kid as it was with some deep social anxiety. But at the time, too, I was also head to toe in corduroy because that was the style at the time. I had corduroy pants, a shirt, and then a corduroy overshirt that went over it. And my folder, I remember my folder. It was a New Kids on the Block folder. Sorry for anybody who doesn't understand what that is, but they were my crushes at the
I was gonna
time.
say that
And
was the awakening. New Kids on the
yeah,
Block. Mm.
that and Wolverine from X-Men. That's a different kind of. That's what I remember being. I remember. Okay, sorry, sidetrack. I remember being when X-Men number one, when they rebooted it in the '90s. There was a scene in X-Men number one. I still have the comic too, where Wolverine bursts through Professor Xavier's desk and then points his adamantium claws, and just one comes out and it stops an inch from Professor Xavier's head. And that's Wolverine's introduction in this new series. And I remember at that point in time, I was like 11 years old going, do I like big, large, big, small, hairy men? Is that what this is? Do I
We
like
stand a short king over here.
Wolverine made me gay. So I'm pretty convinced that Wolverine was my sexual awakening along with Dr. Indiana Jones because I wanted to be in archaeology and for him to be my boyfriend.
Now, I heard that story as well, and I
Yeah.
don't want it. They say never meet your idols. I've
Yeah.
interviewed I've interviewed Harrison Ford a number of times.
No!
Yeah.
Look, man, he is in his 70s now. He is still a tall drink of water. He is still a snack. And that is my daddy issues coming out, I know, but there is still
He's
he
got
is a
it.
snack. He is. So now you've got me thinking about Harrison Ford.
My bad. Actually, no, I won't apologize for that at all.
Yeah, no, nobody should apologize for that. Anyways, where was I? We were talking about um um
Being told that you were good enough, that you could
oh,
be a
that's right,
great
right.
writer.
So I had the folder and I went in and this is, I always thought teachers should take the work home to grade it. And they didn't. They gave us busy work and started grading it right in front of us. And then I just remembered not doing any of the work because I watched my folder get higher and higher and higher and higher and higher in the stack. And then Mrs. Benson got to mine, began to read it, and something happened that hadn't happened with any of the other stories. She was laughing. And it was quiet, it got louder and louder, and Mrs. Pfeiffer came over to see what she was laughing about. She started from the beginning, and by the time they finished, both of them were laughing so hard they were crying. And that was the very, very first time I learned that there is power in the written word, that it can bring people happiness, it can bring people joy, it can cause wars, divorces, breakups. Words can do anything. But I was seeing the positive power of words right in front of me. And yes, in my very last class with them, they did tell me one day I will see your name on a book in a bookstore. I am here because of those two women. I am proof positive of the power that teachers can have over students. And I'll tell you how it came full circle. They were both elderly when I had them, and so they have since passed away. But last year, when In the Lives of Puppets came out, I got to return to that small hometown in Oregon, and I got to speak at the library that saved my life, that I went to every day during the summer as a kid. My librarian was the first person I came out to. So I got to go back to that very same library, to the very same town that had caused me so much pain and grief. And I was able to talk about my experiences, about growing up in this place and seeing these people. And I told the story of Mrs. Benson, Mrs. Pfeiffer, and what I did not know was that in the audience was one of Mrs. Pfeiffer's best friends, former best friends, obviously, since she had passed. And even further, she called Mrs. Pfeiffer's son and told her about that while it was happening. And what he said in response is something that'll stick with me forever, that he has heard countless stories like that about his mother. And that is remarkable to me, because all it takes is one person, in this case, two teachers, to give a kid confidence that he has never experienced before, and they can do amazing things. They can. Look what I've built for myself. This is crazy. I grew up wanting to do this, and I get to do what I love every single day. But there was a chance that I would not have been here if it had not been for Mrs. Benson, Mrs. Pfeiffer.
Honestly, this is like just one of the millions of examples of pay teachers more, America.
Oh my God. There are three groups of people I will go to war for, because they need us more than anything. They are teachers, librarians, and nurses and social workers. That
Yes.
group, putting them in the medical group, they need us more than ever. And the fact that they are not the highest paid people in this country is egregious beyond belief. If you can go into politics and supposed to make a salary but then a few years later you're a millionaire, why the hell are teachers struggling to survive? Why the hell are nurses struggling to survive? Why are librarians struggling to survive?
Oh, I have always said that I don't think you should have to pay to go to medical school, because the value that you get
No.
back. Yeah.
All college education should be free. It should be, because it would benefit so many people. So many people cannot afford to even go to a local community college, even though it could be a cheaper option. But if you made all secondary education free, that would be that would be as close to a utopia as I'm sure we could get. But my God, there would just be an influx of brilliant minds who could change the world because they were given a chance to do so.
I actually think that's a great segue. I learned that you too were a college school dropout. Same. Lasted 6 months.
One semester of community college under my belt.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I,
Absolutely.
I,
So
I,
when you see writers online and they're talking about MFAs and getting their degrees in creative writing or doing whatever, that's great. If you want to do that, pursue that education. But guess what? If you're passionate enough and you want it bad enough and you try your ass off to get there, things can happen. Things can happen.
that's it.
Yeah,
And
community college, man, it wasn't for me. It was
no,
not for me. No,
I
I got out of school, then
hated it.
more school, and I was ADHD all over in that time, and I was like, nope, can't do it. Can't do it.
I do have a note in here, which is just in all caps. Libraries are so important. I agree with you for that. Mine was walking distance from my house, so it was like every weekend was like a little excursion that I got to take to get my books out.
Mhm.
But even I'm such an advocate for apps like Libby, which is a free online app
Oh
where you
God,
can,
yes,
you know,
absolutely. Absolutely. Because you can hear it from me. I don't care what other authors say, you can hear it from me. You want to buy my book? Great. You want to check it out from a library? Great. You want to buy it secondhand from a thrift store? Great. Whatever you do to get you to be able to read, that is totally okay with me. That is totally fine with me. Now, if we go to the pirating thing, maybe I'll have a few little,
yeah.
but at the same time, there are so many ways to be able to read books, but your local library, if you have one available to you, is one of the best resources you could possibly have because without a library, a community can't really exist. They need that center.
hmm Strong agree. I will note though, in my full image, oh, it's covered by these books. I have both the books in my bookcase, so I'm doing my part for you and encouraging people
Thank you.
to read your book as
I
well.
appreciate that. The bills
You've
go
written.
towards my dog who's laying right here. So
What's your
he's,
dog's name? Because my dog's name's Zelda.
oh, his name is Hendrix after Jimi Hendrix because he's
Oh,
one of
what a
my favorite.
cutie.
Yeah, he's my buddy.
Oh, I love that. Zelda, uh, she always abandons me. I have a bed for her
Aw.
right here, but she's just like, peace out. I've had dinner now.
See, now
Um,
we're doing my favorite things. We're talking about books, video games, and dogs. Those are like my
yes,
three favorite things in the world.
the shards of the
Yeah,
trifecta, the Triforce right there.
right.
Um, I want to talk about how you landed on fantasy as a genre. You've written quite a few genres. I know that you keep moving around, so I'm going to give you a little bit more headroom here.
Oh,
Um,
sorry.
that's okay. What is it about fantasy that made you fall in love with that genre? Because I believe it's your favorite.
It is absolutely my favorite. Fantasy is where I feel most at home. Fantasy is where I feel like I can do anything. You know, contemporary fiction, I've written contemporary fiction. In fact, my first book was a contemporary family drama released by an indie publisher in 2011, but I've always read fantasy growing up. I try to devour anything and everything. I read fiction, I read nonfiction, I read stuff that I want to because I want to learn, but I read stuff that I think I need to because I need to learn. And the fantasy, particularly when I'm thinking of like Diana Wynne Jones with Howl's Moving Castle, when I'm thinking of the works of Terry Pratchett and Douglas Adams, I think about how wonderful that is because it shows that fantasy doesn't have to be dark.
Mm,
It doesn't have to be, for a while, in the 2000s it was YA dystopian. In 2010s it was YA dystopian plus grim dark because Game of Thrones was blowing up and everybody's
yep.
reading the books and watching the show. And then 2020 hit, and what else came with that? The pandemic. And everybody was like, oh no, I don't want to be sad. Let's look at happy things. And I think more and more people realize that fantasy and science fiction, even, they aren't all about doom and gloom and the end of the world. There is a place for that. And I'm not saying that I'm not going to write some doom and gloom in my future, but I'm saying that it's important to show so many different sides. And that's what fantasy is to me, is I don't have to worry about real world constraints. I don't have to worry about including homophobia in my book because that's in the real world. I think homophobia is boring. So I don't want to include that in my world. And it's just, I can make up my own rules. I can, in addition to making up the characters, I can create entire worlds with backstory, with lore, with all these little things. And the fact that I do that with my imagination is something that has never failed to astound me. I don't know how I do some of the things that I do, but I'm so grateful that I get to do them. It's just fantasy has always been my home, and this is where I have firmly planted my flag. I don't anticipate writing contemporary anything going forward. Science fiction and fantasy all the way.
That's so apologies for the name drop. I am going to do it. I was able to interview Andy Weir about science fiction and that exact conversation about this doom and gloom. And he's like, science fiction is all about we're fucked. Like we're all
Yeah,
just
yeah,
fucked.
we're all
And
gonna die.
and he doesn't want that because he actually truly believes that as technology develops, we as a, humanity want to help people. And that technology, yes, it can harm, but at the same time, it really can help. And so he drives the conversation on how we can continue helping each other. And I find that with your books as well, you have such a wholesomeness that is just wonderful. And I like to describe myself as wholesome yet sassy, which sounds like an oxymoron, but I swear
Yeah, no,
I'm
that's how I
making it
am.
happen. Yeah, right. Um, I also love that you brought up sort of Howl's Moving Castle as one of your inspirations and fantasy that inspired you, because the feedback that we had from Maude's Book Club as a community is that Under the Whispering Door should be a Ghibli movie because it
Oh
lends itself.
God.
Wouldn't that
Can
just
I
be
tell you why?
perfect?
Can I tell you why it should be a Ghibli movie aside from the fact that would be amazing? Because nobody like Studio Ghibli, nobody animates food better.
Food.
Nobody animates food. I will go to my grave saying that nobody in the world has ever animated food like Studio Ghibli does. When they're stirring pots of broth, or when they have it in their bowls, or when they're tearing apart bread and you
Even
see it flake
chopping,
across,
putting it
chopping
in the
everything.
soup.
Like when we get done with this, I'm going to go watch The Boy and the Heron because I haven't gotten to see it yet. And I'm so excited about that because I want to see what kind of food is in it. But yes, Under the Whispering Door would be, of all the ones that I've written, that would be the one I would want to see animated because
Mm.
either Studio Ghibli or Leica Studios, who does a stop motion animation, I love that style too. But yes, absolutely, absolutely, that would be awesome. Studio Ghibli is top tier.
But the tea shop and the aromatic ways and the themes of
Yeah,
tea being such an
right.
identifier.
Right, and you can vision it in their style with the
Yep.
plants hanging from the ceiling, the ivy, the fire in the fireplace, and it's just gosh, that would be so cool. So when you do you have contacts with Studio Ghibli then? Do you want to
I'll make a
send them
few
my
calls for
way?
you. Absolutely. I mean, if we're thinking it, we're just lending them the best idea that they never
I
had or
know,
haven't
right? For
had yet.
real. It's right,
Mm.
it's right there. How good would that be? Miyazaki doesn't even need to work on it. I don't know what he does now, but come on, let's do it.
I just think that the characters and like that sense of, we are going to pair really heavy conversations about grief and facing who you are with having this almost caricature version of Wallace going through his own arc. It's
Mhm.
perfect movie. When you write stories, you say that you'll have a voice that kind of just
Yeah.
speaks to you, and the loudest voice becomes your main character. How was
Yeah.
it finding Wallace? Because he's
Oh,
quite unlikable to begin with. What is it
he
like walking
is.
in his shoes?
So Wallace, obviously there's a bunch of things that go into Under the Whispering Door, but at its base point, at its jumping off point was Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol.
Mm.
Because when we see Ebenezer Scrooge, he is going through a similar journey that Wallace goes through. But look, and I always feel really weird saying this, so I'm going to give a warning. Charles Dickens is one of the greatest writers, obviously, who has ever lived, obviously, and I am but a tiny fleck of sand on his magnificent beach. So, okay, but the thing that always bugged me about A Christmas Carol is you never saw Scrooge doing the work to become a better
No,
person.
no.
He's just shown all the horrible things he's done, and at the end, it's like a switch is flipped, and all of a sudden he's good again, and that's the end.
And that's not how
and
life
and
works.
right, and again, it was a shorter story, a shorter work, so it's not going to necessarily go into that. And again, I'm not trying to slam on Dickens for anything, but I wanted to see what happens if a person like Scrooge, who instead of seeing ghosts became one himself and could do nothing to change what he's done in the past, what does that look like if you're not necessarily focused on the past, even though it's a huge part of it, but going forward? What do the next steps look like? So we get Wallace at the beginning, we have Wallace at the end, but how do those 2 points how do we get from point A to point B? And that's the biggest thing I wanted to work. Look, that book was hard for me to write. It was deeply, deeply personal. I worked my butt off on that book, but I don't think I've ever worked harder on a character than I've worked on Wallace Price, because you despise him at the very beginning. And you're supposed to. But it's a very careful line that an author has to walk, because if you give him his salvation too early, it feels unearned. But if you take it too late, the reader's like, he doesn't deserve it. So I have to walk a very careful line while also juggling all these larger themes with it. And I'm really proud of that book. I'm really proud of how it came out and how it turned out. And Wallace, God, he's an asshole. He's a freaking asshole at the beginning. And I love that about him.
And we actually had that conversation about Wallace where he couldn't be evil, but he just had to be unaware. And having unawareness as a flaw it's the recipe for sort of being stagnant and unchangeable, unmovable. And I think that
right. Is he cruel? Or is he just a jerk? I think that there's a big difference. He's so self-involved that I think that while actions could be considered cruel with how the book opens and whatnot, I think you're right. I just think it's a lack of self-awareness of who he is. He's had everything he's ever wanted. Everything goes his way. So why would anything be different?
Mm-hmm. And I do love the notion of found family that he actually wasn't looking for. This was almost like forced confines family, but it turns out that
right.
when given the choice, he would choose them every time. And I love these catalyst moments of Wallace never being told no, ever. And then immediately with May, she's so disarming. And I called her Teflon because he's slinging shit and it is not sticking. And I think that her disarming nature has like brought about a different version of him. And then having Hugo, who is the most generous, giving person ever. I guess with all of these characters here, who did you relate to the most? Because you said it was deeply personal. What are the parts that you poured yourself into?
Right. So the backstory for this, if you read the dedication, you'll know it says, "To Eric, I hope you woke up in a strange place." And the reason it says that is twofold. One, Eric was my partner who passed away in 2016. He was also an author. He wrote a book about his own version of the afterlife, what he thought, called Woke Up in a Strange Place. And it's my very favorite book about the afterlife. You know, we had a joke going between us when he was alive, was that I was the best, bigger selling author and he was the better author. And it's true. It absolutely is true. He was the better author. And I have no reservation saying that whatsoever. In 2013, Eric was disabled. When he was younger, when he was 18, he was knocked into an empty pool and landed on his head. And so he had some mobility issues on his right side. He walked with a cane. And he was very big into fitness. He was a bodybuilder. He was a huge, huge guy. And we met, fell in love. A year later, I asked him to marry me. He said yes. We moved into our first house together at that point. And 6 weeks later, he collapsed in our home and his legs weren't working. And, you know, through the next haze of days and weeks and months, we'd learned that he had what's known as a calcified hemangioma, a brain tumor growing on the worst place a brain tumor can grow, on the brainstem. For those that don't know, your brainstem, basically your brain sends everything through your brainstem. That is how your body knows how to act. And the reason that his legs stopped working was because the tumor was squeezing in on the brainstem. So he was given a choice. He was told, while he was intubated, while he was drugged to the gills, he was told, you can either let the tumor take its course, or you would pass in weeks, months, or we can go in and try to remove the tumor in the most dangerous place to remove a tumor. And Eric was brought out of sedation and heard all of this and said 6 words, which was the "let's go, let's go, let's go," which is what I got tattooed right here. And they did the surgery. And this is how I learned the difference between brain surgeons, neurosurgeons, and the support staff, like nurses, healthcare workers, the people who are there. For some reason, this is just my opinion, but for some reason, I think that to do that kind of complicated surgery, you have to be callous. You have to be cold. You have to be, the nurses are some of the best people I've ever met. They helped me so much, but I'll never forget the surgeon coming out after the 13, 14-hour surgery with a big smile on his face saying, we got the tumor, we got all of the tumor. And we were all cheering and jumping up and down. And the next words were, but Eric is paralyzed from the neck down and will be for the rest of his life. Because while they had gone in to get the tumor, they had nicked something known as the phrenic nerve, which the phrenic nerve, when you inhale, exhale, that's how you do that involuntarily. And they nicked that. So Eric was not only a quadriplegic, but he was on a ventilator for the rest of his life. And unfortunately, as most people who have been in the situation can attest, people who are quadriplegic, people who are on ventilators, tend to pass from the same reason, pneumonia. Because when you have an open wound on the body, which is essentially what it is, it's a breeding ground for bacteria, and there's really not a whole lot you can do. So Eric passed in 2016, and I want you to realize this: from 2013 to 2016, Eric was paralyzed from the neck down and could only move his head from this and that. He was still the strongest person I've ever met. I know I would not be able to do what he did. I know that for a fact. I am not as strong a person as he was. And so I got lost. I got lost in the toxicity of grief. I was so angry at everybody because, 6 weeks before this had all happened, I was proposing to him. And then all of this happened and completely wrecked my world. And I was so angry at everybody, my friends, my family, his friends, his family, everybody, because they were all going about their lives. But here I was, and they weren't going about their lives, because everybody, and the point of this, what I'm trying to get to, is what I learned and why I wrote this book is because if you live long enough to know what love is, you will know loss at some point in your life. And yet, no two people experience grief the same way. Why is that? And I wanted to know why. Why do certain people grieve this way? Why do certain people grieve this way? Why am I grieving the way I am with this anger, this vitriol? And so I did the only thing I could. I wrote through it, and that was Under the Whispering Door. So this book, most books have bits and pieces of me in them. That's how authors work. We do that because it's what we know. But Under the Whispering Door is drenched with me. Every bit and facet of the book is something that I felt, something that I did. Hell, every single tea mentioned in the book I tried just so I would know what it tasted like, so I could describe it accurately on page. And the tea that Alan has, the really gross tea that tastes like lawns, that tastes like lawns. It is so gross. I do not like it. But yeah, that book, it was born of anger. It was born of this rage. And by the end, I can't say I got the answers I was looking for, but it had completely reconceptualized what death means to me. I no longer fear death because it's not like I'm going out putting myself in positions where to test that, but I think about death differently now. I'm not a person who believes in heaven or hell or anything like that. Ironically, weird thing, I think there's a TV show that got it best, what happens to us, and that is The Good Place.
Good life.
I think at the very end, at the very end, when they all basically go back to the universe, I think that's what it is. And if we happen to go to a tea shop along the way before we get there, all the more power to it. I often hear from people after who've read this book and ask me why a tea shop. And the reason it's a tea shop is because I try to think of a place that makes me feel comfortable and safe. And when I was a kid growing up, there was a tea shop in the town that I lived in that I took a book from the library and I'd go to that tea shop and sip tea and sit on the couches. And that was the place that nobody judged me. Nobody was there to take anything away from me.
I just want to thank you so much for sharing your story, because I feel like you really have had a first-hand interaction with grief that many people won't ever experience. And so,
and it's 5 years ago, 4 years ago, 3 years ago, that would have been impossible for me to even talk about without breaking down. But it's just grief. What I've learned is this: for anybody who wonders about grief, what I've learned is this: grief will never ever go away. What's so weird and wonderful about grief is that instead of it going away, we get bigger around it, and it hardens, it calcifies. Yeah, it may chip every now and then to remind you that it's there, and it may hurt, but you have grown bigger around it because it's part of you then. It's not the biggest part, it's not the only part, but it is part of you, and you learn from that.
I also think that grief is a subject so many people run from.
Well, it's
And
taboo. It's absolutely taboo. It's on par with talking about salary and sex and
mm,
everything like that. It's absolutely taboo because no one wants to think about what happens when they go. Nobody wants to think about that moment because we're all conditioned to survive by any means possible. But the more we have open discussions about death and grief and what that can do people, the better off we'll all be. Hell, I don't think that we've reconciled with what the pandemic did to us
mhm,
as a
agree.
species. I still think there's a huge bit of grief, and I'm not just talking about huge grief. Yes, people have lost a lot during the pandemic. People, opportunities, jobs, and those things can be. There's big grief and there's little grief. The little grief are the loss of those jobs, the loss of connections, opportunities, friendships, and those hurt. Those can hurt just as bad.
Mm.
Little griefs, the loss of a pet is akin to losing a loved one. It is akin to losing somebody you see every single day. And all that grief matters. And we just have to talk about it more because the more we talk about it, the less mystique it'll have.
And I also think grief is something that it's the inevitability. We are going to experience grief. And
Yes.
if we're lucky, we experience grief immensely before we die. And I
Yeah.
think that to put words behind it, I think probably in recent memory, the best way media has discussed grief was WandaVision. What is grief if not
Oh,
love
yeah. That was a
persevering?
very good way to talk about grief. It surprised the hell out of me when I saw what they were doing with that. Because when,
Oh,
the commercials and everything, I thought it was going to be like, oh, it's kind of weird jumping through TV shows, but it was wonderful. That was one of the best things they've ever done.
it almost gave people permission to grieve, knowing that at its core, it's love. And I
Mhm.
think there is a lot of shame around grief. And I think,
Well, there is, and there's an idea that grief is selfish, but yeah, it is. It inherently is. It's what becomes of that selfishness that you don't turn it into toxicity, like with what happened to me. We need time to be selfish in that regard because what is happening has happened to us as a group and as an individual. And, but people don't want to talk about that because again, it's taboo. It's something that we don't focus on. You never want to think about that.
also, with what you were experiencing, I often know within myself, like a big growth that I've had to go through, I always felt it more safe and comfortable to be outwardly angry than inwardly sad. So
Oh,
I,
absolutely. It's easier when you are using that anger because it's endorphins. It goes through you and it feels good in a very dark way. Whereas
mm,
when you're just crying, you feel miserable. You feel awful. You absolutely do.
mm. So, I'm understanding what you were going through.
Yeah,
But
I think a lot of people do. They just don't want to talk about it. And I wish we could change that.
And the way that you bring conversation to those things we're not supposed to talk about or shy away from or don't want to talk about, I love what you did with Cameron, the husk, and the notion of
Mhm.
what a husk is. And that a lot of the time we've experienced conversation around suicide as we don't talk about it, there's shame around it, there's a helplessness that's happening there. But what I brought to the conversation with that is that it even takes something bigger than us, like even those things that are bigger than us, like afterlife, etc., still sometimes don't recognize that everyone needs a chance. Everyone
Mhm.
needs that hope, that ability to sort of like move in their own way. So talk to me why Cameron was one of the more important characters in Under the Whispering Door.
So I wanted to make this book as agnostic as possible. So anybody coming in, regardless of your faith, you could read something. That's why I never showed it what was on the other side of the door because I don't know. And it's not for me to know. It wasn't like I had an idea in the back of my head that I just didn't use. I was never going to show that because the whole point of the book is we don't know until it's our time. And I wanted people who came from any faith, whether you believe in God or not, to be able to see that. That's why we don't necessarily talk about God or religion in this book. And speaking of religion and how it comes to Cameron, there is something that absolutely bugs the royal shit out of me, and it's the way religion treats those who die by suicide. And that is, there are certain major religions in this country that believe those who die by suicide go to hell. That they are not. They'll even go as far as to not let somebody who dies by suicide have their funeral held in their church because of those beliefs, and that floors me. That absolutely floors me. That you are supposed to be teaching the word of God. You are supposed to be teaching love and acceptance and hope. And then you're telling grieving families who lost somebody who made an impossible decision for themselves that their child or their brother, sister, loved one, whoever is going to hell. No, that's not how it should be. That's not how religion works. To be blunt, I was Cameron. I was almost Cameron. I had some very, very severe suicidal ideation after Eric passed, and it was very close. Thankfully, I got the help that I needed thanks to friends and copious amounts of therapy, which is I recommend to everybody. And so including Cameron was the most personal part of Under the Whispering Door, aside from it being about my loss, but it was the most personal part because that was where I had to look at the ugly parts of myself. And not to say that people who do that, people who choose to make that decision are ugly. I just had to look at what made me feel like I had to be that way, like I wanted to make that decision. Is it a selfish decision? Yes, but no one can know why a person made that decision unless they told you explicitly why. And I wanted to show that no matter how lost someone got, that they could be found, because it is not fair that people who make that decision are demonized and cast off because they're hurting and they made this decision. They made this decision. Yes, it has ramification. Yes, the ripples could be felt forever, but this was what they thought was best for them at the time. This is what they thought would help them. This is what they thought would make everything feel better. And we hate on them for it. That's bullshit. That's absolutely bullshit. So Cameron was showing everybody gets redemption. Everybody gets love. Everybody gets hope. It doesn't matter who you were in life or how you went out. You deserve to find your way home.
I love that. And I do think that was incredibly important. And it stemmed an incredible discussion within our book club as well. And it's wild for something that society has kind of deemed somewhat taboo. A lot of people have a story, if not almost everyone.
Oh, goodness. So a big byproduct, something that I did not expect but should have expected, was how many stories of grief I would get from people who have read this book, of people who lost someone and how it's affected them. And I have had stories from so many people who had Camerons in their lives. I've had so many people. It is something that happens constantly. It's something that it doesn't matter, what your background is, what your culture is. It does not matter. It is your brain. It is the chemicals in your brain making you like this, making you depressed, making you hurt. And it happens so often. It happens so often. And it's something that, again, it's like a silent shame. We don't talk about that kind of stuff because if someone tells you, yes, my son or my partner or my grandfather or whoever died by suicide yesterday, what do you say to that? What is your response to something like that? I mean, even someone like me who tries to be as empathetic as possible, who's still learning to be empathetic as possible, there's going to be a moment of shock. There's going to be, I mean, even if, yes, there would be when you hear someone dies, but there's something about saying the words dies by suicide that creates this pall, that casts this net of confusion that nobody knows how to navigate.
It's a deeper sort of despair comes from that as well, and
Yeah,
helplessness.
absolutely. Absolutely. Because you don't know, not to say anything about how anybody else passes away or how they do it, but I can only imagine that way. And I've had people in my life that have gone that direction. The thing that sticks with you the most is why. That's something that you may never get the answer to. It's the why. Why? Or could I have done something more? And that's something that'll haunt you for the rest of your life, even if it's not your fault. Even if nothing you could have done could have made it better, you'll still think, could I have done more?
Yeah. And that's a really tough situation. But this book providing that avenue of discussion and conversation. And it's almost like if you didn't get it in your personal story or of your life, you got to see Cameron have it. And sometimes that's enough
Yeah,
as well. Yeah.
it is. And
Um,
it gives you a second to walk in someone else's shoes.
and that is how empathy is created, which is
Absolutely. Absolutely.
yay. Um, I was learning that if Under the Whispering Door was the shoulder provided to lean on, House in the Cerulean Sea is the hug that we all need. And
Hmm.
to move the conversation to House of the Cerulean Sea, it is a perfect 5-star book. This book is like so wonderful. You want to be there.
Mm.
These characters are larger than life. It is so wholesome. And it's just lovely to sort of bask in goodness, I suppose, and
Hmm.
hope and cherishment and all the positive words. If you were getting sort of feedback from Under the Whispering Door, which was a sense of a lot of grief, what was the biggest abundance of feedback you were getting from House in the Cerulean Sea?
The House in the Cerulean Sea, the biggest thing I get is from teachers, social workers who say, I have a Lucy, or I have a Chauncey, I have a Sal, I have a Fia, I have a Talia, I have a Theodore. I get that more than anything. Out of any other book I've written, the emails I get the most are people who work with children or who take care of children or in some capacity are around children are saying, I know children like this. And guess what? A lot of times they're special needs kids. And something I wanted to go on with that is when I was a kid growing up, my mother had a brother named Matt, who was an older brother. And at birth, Matt was born with cerebral palsy. He was confined to a wheelchair, but he was absolutely 100% with it. He could not talk, but we basically had to learn a second language. We had to learn his vocalizations. We learned to speak Matt. And when Matt got old enough, he wanted his own independence, even though he was wheelchair bound, even though he couldn't. So he moved into a group home that was literally right next door to my middle school and just a mile down the road from the high school that I went to. So I got to go over there almost every single day to see Matt thriving in his independence, seeing the support staff there helping the adults in there, but also seeing the other special needs adults. And the thing that I think that sometimes gets lost with when talking about people with special needs or people with disabilities is how much independence is so important.
Mm.
How important it is that within their capacity of what they can do, that they be allowed to do it. Because, Matt was a full thinking adult. He could make his own financial decisions. He had a job that he went to and did. And it's just that sometimes you need help. And growing up in that, watching him in the Special Olympics, doing programs with Easter seals and stuff like that, that taught me, I think, a very valuable lesson early on, especially being surrounded by so much hatred as a kid growing up, is that you have to be, why can't you be nice to people?
Yeah.
Why can't you just be nice to people? Why is it that we have to judge other people for how they look, what they do, who they are, something that they could not control, being born with a disability, chronic pain, whatever? Why do we judge people? Why do we do this? So I wanted to just show a world where there is judgment, but at the same time, there is a place that is healing. There's a place that is loving and supportive, where these kids who have been orphaned, who are going through so much, they find a place to land. They find a place to be. And, I talked in preparing for that book and then preparing for the sequel, I talked to social workers and I talked to them about what they do. And aside from hearing that they're grievously underpaid, understaffed, overworked, is that every child deserves a chance. Every kid, no matter how big their issues might be, they deserve a chance. I mean, my nephew when he was younger, had oppositional defiance disorder, which is very scary. It's very scary. And now he's a 22-year-old young man who is successful, doing wonderful things, being a great kid. Kids deserve chances, even when there may be some negativity surrounding whatever about them. They deserve a chance to be kids. What I love about kids is they don't have the filter of cynicism that comes with age. They say what's ever in their heads, and it's weird and it's crazy and it's dumb and it's wonderful. So that's what I did with this book. I wanted to show a book where kids could get to be kids while telling a larger narrative around them about an entire world that is scared of them. And again, it comes from the fact that I know what it's like to be othered. I know what it's like to be told you're different and not worth this, or this. And so many people have it worse. And I just wanted to tell a story where people who were odd, weird, and strange got together and made magic.
I've just realized that the teachers that you had in the 7th grade are very similar to sort of like the Arthur Parnassus, which is just, I'm going to champion you. I see your beauty. I see
Mm-hmm.
your strengths, and I will make sure I can do what I can for you to succeed with this.
And I mean, Arthur knows. Arthur is, we get to see more of that in the sequel, how things were for him as a child, but he knows what it's like to be in that position. And I could have initially written the book from his perspective, but I think having an outsider like Linus come in, somebody who has been told he's as appealing as watching paint dry, come in and have his entire world changed because he was a victim of being a cog in a corporate machine. He was a victim and being in a bureaucratic nightmare, and he escaped and saw the world for what it was. Like Dorothy, he saw color for the first time when he got to his version of Oz.
I love that. And it's very interesting that both Wallace and Linus were, by the book, very rules based, very sort of ordered in a way. And then it just takes sort of to unstructure your thinking and to break open the confines of a box that you can place people into.
Well, that kind of came from me because I unfortunately was a bureaucratic worker for 10 years while writing, and I was in a cubicle hell. I worked for a major insurance company here in the United States whose lizard commercials you probably all know and despise. And I was the person you called when you were in the worst accident of your life, when people died, when people were getting sued, when people were grievously injured. Guess who answered the phone? Me. So I did that for 10 years. And then one day, one of the big higher ups in the company, the entire company, came to our office and met with me, and I had to do this presentation. And at the very end, he told me, you're very good at insurance. And I don't know if anybody's ever told you that before, but it is soul crushing.
I was going to say, like, where's the compliment?
So then,
yeah.
3 months later, I quit, and I've been writing full time ever since.
I love that. But you've done your time. You had that cubicle life.
I did my time. But Linus and Wallace, I know by the book because that's who I had to be.
But then you also have your own character arc and your journey.
Yeah, absolutely. Now I'm living in a crazy world full of color, and it's the best thing. It's the absolute best thing.
Now, the sequel is coming out in 2 months' time, I believe. Now, the first book, House in the Cerulean Sea, wrapped things up so nicely. Did you anticipate a sequel, or was it the success of the first book that was like,
oh God, no. No. I don't write like I'm very happy that the book has found the audience, and then the subsequent books have found the audience that they have. But I never write for what people want. I don't write for what somebody wants, because if you try to make everybody happy, you're going to make nobody happy. And I can't do that. So in fact, I wrote House in the Cerulean Sea, Under the Whispering Door, In the Lives of Puppets, all before the House in the Cerulean Sea came out in 2020. So all of those books were done. So nothing was contingent upon what book did well or anything. Those were all finished. So the Somewhere Beyond the Sea is actually the first book that you guys are going to read that wasn't written before 2020. Wow. So it's crazy. But look, basically it boils down to two things. Chauncey won't shut up in my head ever. Love Chauncey him. Chauncey is my absolute favorite character I've ever written. I adore everything that he is. And normally when I finish writing a book, characters will kind of just go to sleep. They'll fade away. Chauncey just does it. Chauncey doesn't do any of that. Chauncey stays. And I started seeing what was going on in this country, much like in 2018 when we were in that presidency and I wanted to put some good out in the world. In 2021 and 2022, we started seeing a lot of anti-trans vitriol move through the United States and across the pond in the UK. There were hearings held here in the United States where trans people were parents and guardians of trans youth, and gender-affirming medical professionals were all called to testify in front of the government, or were invited, I should say, to give testimony, not necessarily knowing that it was an ambush, because there were almost two schools of politician up there. There was ones that said, we hear you, we love you, we see you, and then turned around and voted against pro-trans legislation. And then there were the smarmy, condescending motherfuckers who smiled, and their condescending smiles, and questioned the trans people on the right to exist, their bodies, their minds. It questioned the parents and guardians of trans youth, asking if they were transing their children. They questioned the qualifications of the medical professionals who provided care. And that pissed me the hell off. I mean, these are people going out there and speaking their truth, and this is the reception that they receive from their elected government officials. Who are these politicians who aren't medical doctors in any way, shape, or form? Who are they to tell a trans person you should not exist? And so what did I do? I started doing research again. I reached out to those social workers. I reached out to other people that I'd spoken to before when I was writing The House in the Cerulean Sea, but also I got to speak to some people who testified in those hearings. I got to speak to trans people, and there was one question. I asked them all questions, but there was one question that I made sure was uniform across. If you knew what was coming, if you knew the fallout, the media coverage, everything that was coming, would you do the same thing again? Every single one of them said unequivocally, yes, they would. And that is the power of this community. That is the power of these individual people and their spirits to be able to get up there and face that kind of hatred and come out knowing that they spoke their truth. And I am so goddamn proud of the trans community for what they do. And also, fuck J.K. Rowling.
Yeah,
Sorry.
thank you. No, get it out, I say. It is really hard that I feel like sometimes with progression, it's 2 steps forward and then about 10 steps back. And that can
Well,
be
that's
really
what it
hard.
feels like, because I mean, this trans panic. I mean, it's not so different than, say, like a satanic panic that was here in the 80s. It's not so different than the AIDS panic, where everybody was like, oh, you can get AIDS from just being near queer people. It's like this, you can become trans by just being near trans people. It's not how any of that works. It's not how any of that works. But people are recycling these old arguments and just trying to slap new labels on them.
And a lot of the time we find out that it is the more you outwardly hate something, it's because you're bearing your own secret and the shame is hurt.
Oh God, yeah.
You
Some of
know?
the biggest homophobes I've met in my life
Hmm.
turned out to be gay, and they, it's how it is. But I do want to say one other thing, though, and I think it's important to say, especially since I come from a place of privilege, is that some of the biggest transphobes I have met in my life are not right wing, grifters or religious right. They are cis white gay men. And it's important that as a cis white gay man myself, that I point that out, man. I have met some really awful people in my community who are just as transphobic as anybody else out in the world. And it's harmful. Like, sometimes the call is coming from inside the house, and we
Right.
need to be concerned about that.
It is really, yeah. Even if you're a part of the queer community, it's like when your brain won't allow you to understand. It's just easier. It's like with death. When you're afraid of something, you ignore it. If you're afraid of change, you won't listen or you won't allow it. And I think
And
that
that's why
really,
when I hear the arguments of like transphobe, I'm not scared of trans people or homophobes. I'm not scared. Yeah, you kind of are because it's not your norm. It's not, but then again, it's not for you, obviously. Mind your own business.
yeah, that's it. You want to fight for the right for someone else, but you don't have to want what they have. You know what I mean? But
Right,
you
exactly.
can allow them to have what they want. It's
Right, exactly. If they're not
mm,
hurting anybody, if everybody's fault is everybody's doing everything by you're done, it's no concern of yours how they live their life. It's no concern.
also zero predator behavior from drag queens. Still, who would have thought?
I
Let them
wonder
read.
what that means.
Let them read books to children.
And if I can only imagine how my life, how different things could have been me for as a kid if I gotten to go to a drag story time.
Oh,
I can't imagine. Can you know how amazing that is for kids who are questioning and they get to see that kind of happy person being out there living their best life? I love drag queens.
yeah.
I'm a big proponent of drag queens.
We are actually out of time, which is so heartbreaking for me. But I do have one quick thing that I would like to talk about.
Yes.
Lucy being named Lucy. I just wanted to share a little story with you.
Yes, please do.
One of my first cars, it had a number plate with 666 in it, and I had a car called Lucy for Lucifer. So
Yes.
when I saw that, it's just like another one of our things that we seem to
Yeah,
have in common
you
here.
do.
But
We
yeah.
did we just become best friends?
I think we
So,
did. What's your
oh
favorite
my
dinosaur?
God, I love
Velociraptor?
this.
Yay. But what can you tell us quickly about Somewhere Beyond the Sea? Because I know it's listening to the book again. I had a second reading to prepare for this interview, and the song is mentioned at the end of the book, Somewhere Beyond the Sea. So what can you tell us about
Mhm.
this? Because you did a little happy dance when you grabbed your copy. I know you're proud of this one. Give us a selling
Yeah.
point to prepare us for this book coming out.
This book follows Arthur Parnassus in his journey. It takes place a few months after The House in the Cerulean Sea wraps up. It is at the very end of that book, if you remember, Arthur was called to testify, or he was invited to testify. Given what I just talked about with how the trans community was received, you might guess how that's going to go. But this book is about resistance. You are given your happy ending, but what does that mean? And what does it look like when the kids who have been healing, who have been growing up, what does it look like when they start asking questions? What does it look like when they start pushing back? Because the biggest thing I want people to take away from this book, I have been able to speak to so many thousands of kids across this country and around the world, and they know what's going on. They are smarter, more worldly, more savvy than I ever was at their age. They have all the information in their pockets because of a phone. And they know what's going on. They know the books that are being removed from their schools. They know that their trans and queer classmates are being targeted, and they are pissed off. So the big question of this book, why does no one ask the kids what they want? Why are we not listening to the youth? And it also comes with the growing pains, because Arthur and Linus want to support that. But what happens if your kids disagree with something that you do, or think, or act? Or what if they want to do something else more? How do you protect your kids while still giving them room to fly? And that's the cornerstone of this book.
You have such faith in our upcoming generations, and I love seeing it.
I absolutely do. You know, we have fucked everything up, but not beyond repair. I'll end with this, and this is why I do this. This is why I do what I do. I went to a school in West Virginia, a very rural school. The school itself was 6th through 12th grade. So it was a bunch of younger kids and seniors all going in the same school. So I got to speak to them in their auditorium, 6th through 12th graders. And I use the word queer a lot because that's how I describe myself. That was a word tossed at me in hatred and vitriol when I was a kid, and I took that and made it mine. Apparently, that made some of the school board who was there uncomfortable, because they said, what if a child got offended? This is what they told the librarian who invited me, under the pretense that the librarian was now in some form of trouble. But I'll tell you what, and why I would do that again and again and again, because when I got done, a 6th grader came up to me, a little boy looked me straight in the eye and said, I know all about the gay stuff. And I said, what do you mean, tiny little 6th grade boy? And he said, last year, I had a girlfriend. She came out as trans, and now he's my boyfriend. If a kid can do that, what the hell is wrong with adults? If it is that easy for a child, then why is it so much more difficult for an adult to be able to say to somebody, I don't know what you're going on with, but you know what? I respect your right to do it. It's that simple. The
It's
kids are going to be all right because I've seen them going to be all right. I know what they're doing, and I know their power, and I want to celebrate that with Somewhere Beyond the Sea.
I love that. Well, you're right, because bigotry, prejudice, it's all taught. And the more that
And
it's
they,
kind of like churned through you, the more you start projecting and putting it back out there.
and they know
But
it.
that
They
takes
see all of
time.
that kind of stuff. It's not like when I was younger, when it was just someone in the hall. They see it that too, but they also see it on their phones. They see it on social media. They see the news that goes around. I can't imagine being a kid right now, having to having to have all of that information flooded into your brains. But you know what? So many of them are doing so much good with it, and I can't wait to see what they do. Because one day, and one day soon, all the old white people in power will be gone, and we will need to replace them with people who want to see real change.
Thank you so much for sharing this hour with me.
Thank you for
I've
having me.
adored having you on the show. Your books are magnificent. Thank you for prompting so many conversations and discussions. Thank you for continuing to write books as well. Thank you for not giving up on Chauncey and for letting him shine, even though he won't stop talking. Him and his bellhop
Oh
duties,
my
we're all
gosh.
here for it.
You should
Um,
wait to see what he gets up to in the sequel. He has my favorite part in the whole book. There's a certain scene that I cackle every time I write and read it. It's wonderful.
Well, if the previous wasn't a sell to get the book, that right there was. Pre-order your copy of Somewhere Beyond the Sea. We're so excited to get more from you about this. It's sort of like queer conversations meets X-Men. And I feel like that just
Oh yeah,
sums you
that's
up.
good. That's
Yeah,
good.
sums you up completely. And it's lovely nerding out with you as well. I wish you all the best and hopefully talk soon, okay?
Absolutely. All right. Bye, guys.